This is the Chris Stigall Show podcast.
Okay, guys, let's just rip. And Chris Stigall.
Chris Stigall. Chris, thanks for being with me tonight.
Chris Stigall.
I'm joined now by Chris Stigall.
Now, he puts the broad in broadband. It's Chris Stigall.
The Chris Stigall podcast is presented by usmedicalplan.com. Save big money monthly and get better health coverage at usmedicalplan.com.
It's Friday, the 15th day of September, already halfway through the month. Blink and you nearly missed it. Welcome to the Chris Stigall Show podcast. I hope you've been well. I thank you very much for your continued support, subscription to this podcast so you never miss an episode, and your patience as we navigate some things. Things are changing and constantly evolving. Those of you who were regular Kansas City radio show listeners, you may know this already. You may have heard the announcement. Maybe you didn't. Those of you who are Harrumph Society subscribers, you already did. I have not addressed this here on the podcast because the podcast has been in some flux itself. As those of you who listen to this know, been trying to work out some kinks and some bugs. Apparently didn't make it to Spotify yesterday. It's been kind of a back-end technical mess, which I'm sincerely apologetic about, and really trying to work some kinks out in this new partnership. But in addition to all of that, those of you who don't know and may care to know, or I'm interested in just keeping you up to date anyway, my official daily Kansas City radio show, I am hanging up, and I'm doing so because I'm thrilled to announce that beginning next month in October, I will be joining the Herzog Foundation, a foundation that those of you who are regular listeners know is devoted to expanding and telling the story and promoting and assisting people in growing, opening, supporting, expanding Christian private education across the country, also school choice, and aiding and supporting those of you who homeschool. This is a subject that, again, if you're a regular listener, you know has been something that's been important to Christine, my wife, and me. We are pretty busy with the foundation as of now, doing the regular podcast every week called Making the Leap. If you haven't heard it yet, I hope you'll check it out. It's just been on my heart for a while to do more, and when an opportunity presented itself with the Herzog Foundation to do more, I'll be helping them with their media content, helping them grow and expand some podcast and media offerings. I'll be hosting some new programming for them, some live event programming and things like that. I'm really excited about where this could go. Felt God calling me in this direction for a while now. As for this podcast, it remains. I'm doing it every day. I'll still be doing my radio show in Philadelphia every day. The Harrumph Society is still 3 times a week. I'll be doing that every week. And somehow we're going to try to make it all work. But I just schedule-wise was not able to pull off doing the additional Kansas City show anymore. So to my Kansas City friends, I hate that because that was kind of where I got my entire start. I had a big send-off on Wednesday there at KCMO. This week's been kind of crazy because I was running around Philadelphia all week long. We had our Faith and Freedom Summit with Dennis Prager and Mike Gallagher and Dr. Jeffress and my friend Tim DeMoss, and hundreds of you were there. It was so awesome to hang out and be with you. Out at a couple of different sponsor events. Ray Didinger, my great friend. Eagles got a big win last night on Thursday Night Football. That was awesome. Congratulations to the Eagles. Squeaked out another. I think there's some nervousness, though. They don't feel like they're nearly as dominant in Philadelphia as they'd like to see them, so we'll see. As for the Kansas City Chiefs, sputtering to an 0-1 start. We'll see how they do in week number 2. I got a great show for you today. Monday, I'll be back at it with some more thorough and full analysis. I just got back to my regular home base studio, so I've been in transit this week. Yesterday was a whole day of travel, so I briefly, the Hunter Biden gun charge, I'm aware of that. As I tweeted, and I've been tweeting, and I just wrote at the Harrumph Society today, we can't take our focus off of this presidential election, and I think the Hunter Biden thing they'd like to make go away with a gun charge or a drug charge or tax charges to say, well, that's just a human being and a human's failings and, Judge Leslie and, glass houses and all of that rot. This is about corruption, as you know. This is about influence peddling, as you know, and gun charges, drug charges, tax charges. Warranted, sure, but not the thing. Biden's economy continues to tank. I wrote about this extensively today at the Harrumph Society. You should check it out. I don't think most people are buying it, and I wrote this week, too. If you are a regular Harrumpher, you know what I ultimately believe needs to happen. If they're going to railroad Biden, and it's sure starting to feel like that, we can't allow cackle britches to slip away. I think we begin an Operation Chaos-style campaign to make sure cackle britches is rightly christened as the Democrats' nominee. I think sweeping them both off the front page, as David Ignatius suggested at the Washington Post this week, it's time to move off of Biden and cackle britches together. No. Cackle britches is the number 2. She is who the Democrats chose to be in the number 2 slot. So if the husk can't do it, she's supposed to step in. I think that would be delightful for the GOP. But, of course, the GOP has its own issues. The impeachment and prosecution of Joe Biden in public, that needs to happen. The prosecution of this economy needs to happen. I wrote more about that today at the Harrumph Society. So I do hope you'll check out all of that. I've got some great interviews for you today in the meantime. I saw the UAW went on strike. I got some friends who actually work in the Ford plant in Kansas City. They were asking me, are you going to talk about this UAW strike? I mean, it's wow. I just saw Guy Benson tweet, the United Auto Workers that are currently on strike seek a 46% pay raise, a 32-hour work week with 40-hour pay, restoration of traditional pensions. Men and women of the UAW, I don't know how to break this to you, but there's that thing called technology and robots, and it's not trending in your favor. I don't know how you can demand a nearly 50% pay hike, fewer hours for the same amount of hourly pay, and a fully funded pension system. But as a guy who's busting his ass, quite frankly, and I'm not whining to anybody else because I know that there are a lot of people in this audience who's busting their ass too. Good for you if your private sector union can go get it. I'm profoundly aware how my business is changing. I love doing what I do. I'm not complaining or whining, but I'll tell you this. In just the last 20 years that I've been doing this thing called broadcasting, or now podcasting or digital streaming or whatever, gone are the days of one guy having one show and that being his existence. It's just over. You got to hustle. You got to work harder. You got to step up and you got to do more, and sometimes for less. And if that's not acceptable, I mean, this economy sucks. This economy is squeezing people. This is not just greedy fat cats. This is everybody's getting squeezed in an inflationary period. Again, if your union can negotiate it as a private sector union, go get it, I guess. Now, that's going to mean higher prices in cars for us. We're already talking about $4 and $5 a gallon gas, plug-in cars coming. Those aren't getting any cheaper. You guys, you're kind of in a rock and a hard place here. You play too hard, and then robots will be making our plug-in cars we can't afford, and we're all screwed. So, best wishes and God bless. So that's sort of the 30,000-foot view of things, folks, as we head into the weekend. I thank you, as always, again, for listening to this show and subscribing to it and supporting it. It means a lot. I feel overwhelmed with blessing this week. I've prayed on this a lot. I've been talking with God a lot, and I wrote in the Harrumph Society, if you're a regular user, that none of this that I've been able to call my career would happen if you didn't think it was worth listening to and downloading and subscribing to and supporting. My family and I can't thank you enough. And even when things get a little hinky, when we have some technical glitches, when the content isn't every single day exactly what you'd expect or hope, your patience with me I appreciate as well, as I kind of try to sort out this new life, listen a little more to God's calling in my own life. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I just feel I need to say that again as we head into the weekend. Let me tell you who I also thank, a guy that I hope will save you some big-time money if you've made a phone call to him for private sector health insurance. This is one of the ways in which you can save big-time money. John Ruhlman at usmedicalplan.com. I'm talking big-time money. If you buy your own health insurance, if you spend that monthly premium out of your own pocket, if that's for you as an individual. If you're a senior and you're on a fixed income, you got to buy a supplemental plan for your Medicare needs. If you're a young person and you don't have insurance, by the way, you're nuts, because you're a car accident away from being broke. But U.S. Medical Plan has insurance policies for young, healthy people Like nothing a month. It's a nothing bill. And it's a policy that if you should, heaven forbid, get sick or hurt and you're in the hospital for a long period of time, you're in really great standing because there are policies that'll pay your bills and pay you like a salary if you're laid up for a long period of time for nothing. You really should call John and talk with him about it. You should at least run your policy by John to make sure you're fully covered. That's hugely important. Do you know what your insurance even does if you need it? And if you're spending a bunch of money on kids, or if you're a small business owner and you pay for your health insurance for your employees, please call John. Give him a couple of minutes, and you could save hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a month. He promises on average he's saving people 30 to 60% a month on their health insurance premiums. He's John Ruhlman, usmedicalplan.com. 877-410-4321. 877-410-4321, usmedicalplan.com. Over at the Wall Street Journal, their editor-at-large, Gerard Baker, he has a brand new book that really intrigued us called American Breakdown, Why We No Longer Trust Our Leaders and Institutions, and How We Can Rebuild Confidence. I like that there's a solution to it. I think all of us share that sense that there isn't much about many institutions anymore that we have faith and trust in. But what can we do to actually restore confidence? I'm eager to hear his prescription. Mr. Baker, thanks for your time today. Good morning.
Chris, thanks very much for having me, and please call me Jerry.
Jerry, I would love to hear your solution to what ails us, which is clear that we just don't. I used to think, federal law enforcement were the good guys, and now I actually said in this last week, I fear them more in many cases than I do external American enemies. That's the truth. Like a knock on the front door from the FBI or the IRS. The prospect of that worries me more than Al-Qaeda, and I'm kind of not kidding.
Yeah, well, again, thanks for talking about the book. In the book, I look at this extraordinary phenomenon of the collapse of trust, of public trust, in pretty well all of our major institutions: the federal government, the media, universities, law enforcement, civil society institutions like churches and other institutions. We've seen this over the last 30 years. This is all the polling evidence that I go through. The polling evidence is that people who used to say they trusted all these institutions now have very little trust in them. Part of this, there are a number of solutions, Chris. I think the number of ways of dealing with it. I do think probably the most important, and you hit on it in your observations there about law enforcement, part of it is that these institutions have been captured by people who have ideals and values that are frankly just inimical to those of the American people, and indeed to the values that have made America great over 200 years. It's a phenomenon we've seen again in all of these institutions, in media, in higher education, in the permanent government, in much of law enforcement, as you say, that there's a kind of an elite that's grasped these institutions, wants to drive them in a particular direction, in the direction of their own progressive left-wing values. And again, a significant part, and it's hardly surprising in those circumstances that most Americans have decided they just don't trust them and they can't trust them. So a large part of the answer is that we do, it's a long, painstaking process, but you have to, just as they captured, just as these elite ideologues captured these institutions over the last 20 or 30 years, they've got to be taken back.
Yes, Gerard Baker, Jerry Baker, is editor-at-large at the Wall Street Journal. The book is called American Breakdown. If there aren't kind of fundamental institutions in the country that we can trust, then people start to lose faith in the whole idea of the country to begin with. I mean, the one thing we used to be able to say was, to other third-world despots and tin horn dictators, hey, jailing political enemies and prisoners and not having free and open elections, you need to look at the way we do it. That used to be the things we said, and now I think half the country doesn't even believe that, Jerry.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it is. Yeah, it's very hard for the United States to lecture other countries when things are going on here that we would previously, want to describe as kind of banana republic behavior. It is hard, yeah, and again, it's another reason the American people don't trust it. Look, one of the factors, again, one of the things I look at in the book is how distrust of government arose, and the truth is, people have been lied to for a very, very long time. They've been told things that were not true. And I think part of the phenomenon there is that look at what happened with the Iraq War. And this was a huge moment in terms of the loss of trust. People were told things about going to war in Iraq, that dealing with Iraq would be dealing with the people who were responsible for 9/11, that Iraq had these weapons of mass destruction, that it could launch at us at any moment. And Americans were sent to fight and tragically, in thousands of cases, die and receive terrible injuries on the basis of, again, I won't necessarily say a lie, but certainly a falsehood, that they were told things that were not true, and that was the reason that we had to go to war. So, yeah, it's very hard for Americans to have trust when things like that happen. Or take the great financial crisis that we had in 2008. Chris, we were told that this was that there were all kinds of reasons for this, and that everybody would have to sacrifice as a result of the recession. And yet a lot of those people who were responsible for the financial crisis, the people in the financial sector, they basically got off scot-free, while millions of ordinary Americans lost their homes, lost their jobs, had their lives set back by an extraordinary degree. So we've seen, again, it's what you describe. It's this lack of, it's this performance by government that is more consistent with the kind of behavior we'd expect from banana republics. But it's also failure by government. It's a failure to address the concerns of the American people while looking after the interests of people, frankly, the elites who seem to do fine while everybody else suffers.
And Jerry, you work at the Journal, and you understand this better than most, that media itself, people used to rely. I hear this question. I know you get it all the time, too. This is something I hear almost every time I'm out. Someone says, I just don't know where I can go to get straight news. I don't know who I can trust anymore, or is there even such a place anymore? And I often say, I don't know that there is a source, and I would recommend to you that you consume many sources or watch opposing points of view like an MSNBC and listen to talk radio and then sort some of it out yourself. I think in some ways the idea that we should be spoon-fed news is sort of lazy. I don't like that. I think we should expect more of ourselves. But having said all that, it also feels like when the majority of news media tilts in one direction to such a degree, I mean, it's gotten so bad now, for instance, that I play this all the time. People like Jake Tapper and Rachel Maddow say, we won't let you hear from Donald Trump, who's just been arrested and charged a fourth time. We're not going to let you hear from him because he lies, and we have a responsibility to not let you hear lies. I mean, that's next level, Jerry. I don't know what we do with that.
No, I agree. We've crossed the line with the media. The media, as you rightly say, I've been in journalism for more than 30 years. The media's always leaned to the left. We've always had a kind of progressive crowd that have been in control of most of the major institutions in the country. What's changed, I think, in the last 5 or 10 years is that there's no longer even an attempt to disguise it. I mean, in the past, when I was growing up, these sort of largely progressive journalists, kind of at least claimed that they were trying to pursue objective news and objective truth. They've stopped doing that now. They actually just acknowledge that what they think is their job somehow is to instruct people. They become, as to say in the book, the media become almost like self-appointed sort of like the religious priests, the religious leaders of the Middle Ages. That they have been. The truth is something that journalists used to try and find out. Now the truth is something that they believe has been revealed to them, and it's their job to indoctrinate and to instruct everybody else in. And that's come about again over the last 20 or 30 years as a result of a new class of journalists who basically have decided they don't want to just report the news. They want to tell people what and how to think. And that, I'm afraid, is why people don't trust the media.
I don't know how many people haven't already realized that, but that's a profound and important thing to always tuck away, particularly for younger people in this audience. When you're watching people reporting news, understand that most of them now view it as their job to tell you what should be, tell you what they hope it to be or the way it should be as opposed to what is. News used to be, here is what is, it's for you to decide why. But today it's, here's how we think it should be, and here's what's wrong with what we're telling you. That's a distinctly different approach to journalism. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're open about it as well. They say, there's this whole debate, not really even debate anymore, it's kind of a one-sided debate, that news is no longer, that we shouldn't be striving for objectivity, which is another word of saying the truth in news. We need what they call, it's a lovely Orwellian phrase, moral clarity. So, we need to tell you what's right and what's wrong, not what's actually happening. That's unfortunately the way so much of the media now behaves.
Do you think, and I don't know if there's a fix to this, or maybe we're just culturally now, and the business model is such that everybody just kind of picks a side, picks their camp, and, we're just going to hoist the flag for this side of the political aisle, and that's the prism through which we'll report things, and consumer beware. Is that just going to be the way it is in this country for the rest of our days?
Well, no, not necessarily. I do think one thing is important to remember, and again, I talk about this a little bit in the book. We have kind of been here before. We've had situations in the Republic in 250 years where you've had highly partisan media, where you've had people driving the country in a direction, the country didn't want to go. You could say to some extent that was typical, and that was why we had the kind of crisis of the 1960s that actually, which resulted in the election of Richard Nixon. And, if it hadn't been for Watergate, maybe things would have turned out differently. But you had then the silent majority, as Richard Nixon called it, rose up against it. Or in the early days of the Republic, you had a highly partisan media. Remember, many of our newspapers in this country are called, the Republican or Democrat Gazette. They were basically identified with a particular political view. And back then, again, that's how the media worked. People understood it. I think what happened was people did understand that that's how the media behave, that's what they do, and that they came to basically distrust the media. And so then what happened is they realized they needed trustworthy sources of information, and so other news organizations, other media came about. So I'm a great believer in that the market can work, but it is going to require effort by good people who, share the values, again, that I think have made this country great, that actually is going to require them to actually take part and to ensure that these institutions are once again aligned with traditional American values.
Boy, this is a smart book, and it's a broad look at so many, as you say, the institutions from banks, media, tech, science, medicine, government, law enforcement. I mean, it's all of it, and it's a sad time for the country because I know there's a good number of people in this audience. I speak for myself here, but I think I speak for many others who just feel like, is there anything short of, and I think even many churches, if you want, are probably questionable too. It's a tough time for a lot of people who feel like there's really nothing that you can fully put your faith and trust in these days. Which is why I find myself spending more time thinking about my eternity, Jerry, as opposed to the government the way I used to.
Well, we all need to focus. We will certainly all need to focus on that. That sometimes that is the most productive thing we can probably do.
Yeah, and the book is called American Breakdown: Why We No Longer Trust Our Leaders and Institutions, How We Can Rebuild Confidence. I really appreciate this conversation. I hope you'll come back. Jason Perrett, he is the founder and financial advisor at Eagle Wealth Planning. He's a friend of mine, and he has a passion for getting you on proper financial footing. I don't know if you have a financial advisor. If you don't, I'd strongly urge you to make Jason yours. And you can be anywhere in the country. You don't have to be where Jason is. Jason can deal with you right over Zoom or right over the phone. He's fantastic because he focuses on producing consistent results for his clients based on their unique financial goals. His main objective is just to help you pursue your goal wherever you happen to be. Because he's a fiduciary, he's dedicated to providing clients with complete wealth management and investment services, and he constantly revisits the goals as well. He's not trying to upsell you. Jason can accomplish just about anything you need financially and keep you on track, whether you're a really advanced entrepreneur, whether you're a young person just starting out and you have no real plan at all and you need one, professionals, retirees. Maybe you're thinking about, now that I am retired, I want to make sure all my money's in proper order. Let Jason help you get it in order. Jason regularly revisits your goals, assesses your risk tolerance so that you really approach it as a team, and he helps keep you on track. That's a big part of having somebody as a partner like Jason at Eagle Wealth Planning. I hope you'll reach out. 816-394-8117. 816-394-8117. You can reach out to him through email as well, jason@eaglewealthplanning.com. His website is linked on mine at chrisstigall.com. Get together with Jason. Have a conversation with him. Tell him where you are. Maybe plan out a new path forward for your finances with Jason Perrett a financial advisor at Eagle Wealth Planning. We thank Jason for his sponsorship. Securities and advisory services offered through Cetera Advisors, LLC, member FINRA SIPC, a broker-dealer, and a registered investment advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other named entity. Glad to be back with Johns Hopkins professor, a regular medical contributor on Fox News, and one of our most trusted resources throughout COVID and all things medicine. He's Dr. Marty McCary. It's great to be back with you, Doctor. Good morning.
Good to be with you, Chris. Thanks.
The book, The Price We Pay, by the way, What Broke American Healthcare, and How to Fix It. It's back. It's, I guess, ubiquitous now, as ubiquitous as the flu, the word COVID. It used to be that we were lambasted regularly for saying that COVID was similar to the flu and that it was just going to be something like catching a cold or flu seasonally we would have to deal with. Where do you stand on that today? I remember we were eviscerated once upon a time for even suggesting it because we were supposed to treat it so much more seriously. What of it now with some time and distance and study?
Well, the infection fatality rate in young and healthy people was always similar. COVID and the flu, it was always very low. But right now, we may be in the first point in history where both these seasonal viruses, flu and COVID, may happen around the same time, and flu may account for more hospitalizations. We'll see. We'll find out. Right now, about 15-20% of the United States has either had COVID or has it right now, has either had it in the last 2 months or has it right now in the current wave. That's based on wastewater data. We don't track and genetically map each common cold that people have. But COVID is acting like a common cold virus because people have good underlying immunity.
Without being too graphic during the morning hour, I've always been intrigued with this notion of wastewater data and study. When did that become a thing? How prevalent is that in terms of monitoring illness in the community?
Yeah, it sounds disgusting, doesn't it?
It really does.
Wastewater for viruses. Yeah, it sounds glamorous. Well, actually, the technology has been around for decades. The CDC was very slow to adopt this long-standing technology during COVID. And then when they did get the data, they hid most of it from the public. They probably just incompetence. They just didn't release it. Now we know that we're not going to have COVID test and tracking of every common cold with COVID in America. So this is turning into the best proxy that we have.
And that is what literally is that. I mean, I don't know how to not get graphic, but we're talking about human matter, human material that is tested for the virus that can be detected that way in it.
That's right. DNA testing now allows us to look at the types of different DNA particles in wastewater at water treatment plants and other places, and they can identify a segment of the COVID genetic code in that wastewater, and the volume of that code correlates with the disease burden in the United States. So, for example, based on wastewater data that I looked at 2 weeks ago, we were seeing about 500,000 new COVID cases per day.
500,000. And that is impressive, typical? Where does that land on your scale?
We'll have far more than that during a flu season for the flu. So, I would say it's an expected seasonal bump. But COVID has this stigma. It's very bizarre.
Yes.
Have you heard somebody say, I'm sick, I've got this cough, I'm going to stay at home, but thank God I tested negative for COVID.
I've been talking about that for a while. I don't understand it. We always used to say, I don't feel well, I'm going to stay home. But now we've got a test for COVID, and whew, I don't have COVID, as though feeling miserable and not having COVID is some relief to you. I don't get it. Yeah.
It's like the days when somebody would say, oh, there's an HIV person in the school. It's like, what? No, they're a human being. People have their. What is this, labeling?
I'm sorry to belabor this point, but I'm fascinated by it. What else can you tell from wastewater study besides something like COVID? Is that regularly studied for many different things or only this?
Yeah, it's been studied since I was in medical school. I remember studies showing that there were hormones in the water supply, and that was one of the explanations as to why the age of puberty was going down. Girls have been having puberty at earlier and earlier ages. And that's in part because it's believed there's a lot of hormones. You could, say somebody's on oral contraception, or the agriculture use of hormones results in it in the water supply, and it shows up in what people consume, including children. There's also been studies of antibiotic overuse in the water supply, and that's believed to be perhaps one of the drivers of resistance in part.
Wow. Dr. Marty McCary with us. Again, The Price We Pay is his book, What Broke American Healthcare and How to Fix It. I'll run down the same list we seem to go over every time we talk. I think we're pretty well case closed on masking. Is there anyone that seriously, besides this White House, that continues to talk about masks?
I mean, there's some double masking COVIDian cult members in the medical community, which is most of the leadership and the establishment, and it's really just a political badge at this point. I saw a young, healthy waiter wearing 2 masks while serving outdoors at my table outdoors.
Good grief.
And I just said, I was like, brother, what are you doing? Do you have some special circumstance? And he said, no. I said, you can take off your mask and just put a Biden hat on if this is a political badge. And the Cochrane review is definitive. It came out several months ago, reviewed 17 high quality studies, basically everything that's been done in the field, and was conclusive. Masks made no difference in transmission. They left the door open that if you put on a tightly fitting N95 mask during a brief interaction, you could temporarily reduce your risk, transiently for 20 minutes or something like that. But on a population level, kids wearing masks in schools, absolutely no difference whatsoever. Fauci was confronted with that study on CNN, as you may have seen on social media. And he said, yeah, but there are other studies.
Yes.
Now, I think he's referring to the CDC study of 2 hairdressers in Maricopa County, Arizona. That's a real study they put out. And then they looked at another study of schools where they failed to acknowledge in the study that most of those schools were not even meeting. So they're looking at the effect of masks at school, but they were virtual schools. And the number of schools in the study was greater than the number of schools in the county. So, just loaded with mistakes. Maybe that's what he's referring to.
Yeah, I love when he's confronted with a definitive study and he says, yeah, but there are other studies. Oh, okay, well, sure, I guess. There are other studies. Now, Doctor, the mask study that I saw that really piqued my interest was from none other than the NIH itself, that said prolonged mask use could lead to organ damages and cancer. I mean, had you read that?
There was this caution in an internal communication at the NIH, and even this concern that all these bacteria that you build up is not healthy. So, yeah, they've been aware of this. And, before COVID, there have been studies on masks with other respiratory infections that have showed they don't work. And if you remember, this was Fauci's original position on masks, right? He originally said will provide no benefit.
That's right, he did. You're right. I'd forgotten. I do forget. I don't mean to belabor this point, but I remember I've been covering this and talking about it long enough to remember when Dr. Fauci came on this show and actually said that hydroxychloroquine was something that medicine used in off-label ways is something we practice in medicine all the time. And if you want to give it a shot, give it a shot. There was a time when he actually said that on this show. And then, within months acted like you were a lunatic if you even entertained it.
Yeah, it's amazing. The data to support masks is as weak, as flimsy as the data on, say, hydroxy or ivermectin. But if you recommend ivermectin or prescribe it, heaven forbid, as a physician, you'll lose your license. That's how bad it is right now.
Is that still a thing? Are you still being shamed over that?
I was never really supportive of the data on hydroxy and ivermectin. I was hopeful that it was going to show benefit. But there are doctors out there that have been excoriated for prescribing ivermectin, which has basically no side effects. But you can push a 7th vaccine booster on a 12-year-old and they'll get myocarditis, even though they had no risk of COVID severe illness. And, that's celebrated right now in the medical profession. Medical consensus when they don't have good data, or they go off the rails of scientific studies and data, they make a lot of giant, decades-long mistakes. I mean, opioids are not addictive. Remember that dogma from the medical establishment for 30 years? They tried to tell us that saturated fat, healthy fats, cause heart disease. That was wrong. That was a 50-year mistake. The American Academy of Pediatrics telling parents to keep peanuts away from your kids to prevent peanut allergies. Turns out that caused peanut allergies by keeping them away from your kids. So when they go off the rails and they're like, we don't care about the data, the studies, the Cochrane review, as Fauci says, there are other studies out there. When they go off the rails, they do some serious damage. And that's why we have to just stick to the studies.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like my preacher who says, anytime you hear a preacher in the pulpit start to say, I feel, or I think, you be wary. Be wary of that preacher. I think it's very similar in medicine. Dr. McCary, the shot itself, the booster that's coming out, Joseph Ladapo, the Surgeon General of Florida, came out and said there is no evidence for this thing. There's been no clinical trial done on human beings, that it's even safe for people. And he says, I could even cite multiple studies from around the world that show overtime use of these shots produces COVID, actually increases your chances of catching COVID. Where do you come down on that?
Well, there are 2 studies that have suggested the multiple repeated booster strategy could weaken the immune system. And I don't know what the truth is, but those 2 studies were very suggestive that is a real theory. And, once we got the vaccine, we had more COVID deaths in the US. So something doesn't add up. Now, I think people have good underlying immunity to COVID, either from previous infection, which is pretty much everybody, and to some degree to the initial vaccines. But pushing this would be 7 for, say, a 12-year-old girl. There's this new COVID vaccine approved any moment now. The CDC is about to meet tomorrow to recommend it for the world, for all 300 million Americans, with no human outcomes data, no randomized controlled trial data. So when Karine Jean-Pierre and Joe Biden have declared that this new COVID vaccine that's about to be pushed on everybody, that it quote unquote it works, that's misinformation. We don't have data that it works. Show me the data and I'll support it. But I have concerns about the clear data that 1 in 556 vaccine doses results in a serious adverse event. That's the Freeman study published in the journal Vaccine. In Germany, it was a study showing 1 in 5,000 doses results in a serious adverse event, and kids have a rate of myocarditis as high as 1 in 3,000 doses in young males. So it's not like, just put it in the water supply, just take it, stop arguing, don't ask questions. I mean, there's some known risks to this. It's not like the flu shot. And with the exception of the flu shot, which has a 50-year safety profile, and there's some other factors where this flu shot gets an exemption, every single new vaccine, every single new medication the FDA looks at has to have human data. You have to have a randomized trial or some good clinical trial to get it FDA approved. But the Biden administration has changed that decades-long procedure. Now, Pfizer, Moderna will have private meetings with the White House. The president and Karine Jean-Pierre declare that it works. And then the FDA is basically told to get in line and get this thing approved with no human outcomes data. Pfizer made $100 billion during the pandemic. They can afford to do a clinical trial on the new vaccine to tell us as doctors whether or not to recommend it.
Jeez, Dr. Marty McCary of Johns Hopkins, and The Price We Pay is his book. When you read stories like Howard Stern and his wife are fighting over, I mean, like he says, his relationship is challenged right now because he's so terrified of COVID and doesn't want to go out. And, she's 51 and a young, healthy woman, and she wants to go out and be social. I assume this is probably quite true and real. Families are probably ripped apart. This is becoming as much psychological as it is the practice of clinical medicine. That is, medicinal, or studying COVID or taking medicines to treat COVID. How much of this is psychological now? I mean, you got a government that has effectively scared neurotics to death over this thing.
They have, yeah. It's almost a form of psychological warfare. You know, if you were told, say, 2019, before the pandemic, that there was a government out there in, say, the Middle East that was forcing all their children to cover their faces for 3 or 4 years, you'd say, my gosh, that's a human rights violation. You know, that's an oppressive regime. That's exactly what's being recommended now for 2-year-olds in the U.S. And I think public health officials should just come out and say, you know what, when we had surfers arrested, that was a mistake. Yeah. You know, when we did all these things, that was a mistake, and people would trust them more.
Are you, by the way, just a final question, if you go to a doctor for your regular checkup, or you go there because you've got something wrong with your knee or whatever, and they ask you, have you had your COVID shot? What's the appropriate, responsible response to someone who doesn't want to take it to their doctor when they push it?
I would say, you know, I've decided that I would like to see a randomized controlled trial to show that it works before I take it. And I think that's very reasonable. I mean, we've always said that. There have been vaccines pulled off the market, like rotavirus, for complication rates far less than what we're seeing with the COVID vaccine. And I'm not scaring people. I don't want to suggest that it's a dangerous vaccine, but I think it's reasonable to say you'd like to see the data. The study that people pointed to support boosters was a New England Journal study. Turns out the 90% reduction in mortality that they attributed to the booster shot was simply because the people who got it were healthier. They also had a 90% lower rate of heart disease and cancer and everything else. They had compared a healthier population to a non-healthier population and then said, oh, well, the benefit was attributed to the fact that the healthier people went out and got their boosters. It was not. So people deserve to see a randomized trial.
It's always a pleasure to catch up with you. I always feel better talking to you because you're sane and never hysterical or panicked. Never. Dr. Marty McCary, Johns Hopkins. And by the way, if in fact you ever get that way, then I'll know it's real. It's time to panic. The Price We Pay, What Broke American Healthcare and How to Fix It is his book. Thank you, Dr. McCary. One of the smartest guys that I know, I think one of the most fierce defenders and lovers of law that I know, is the former Attorney General of Kansas. He's been a friend of mine for a long, long time. He is the founder of the Amistad Project, and he has most recently written a piece that caught our attention at Defend the Electors. DefendTheElectors.org is the website, defendtheelectors.org. He's Phil Kline, and joins us again. Phil, I'm glad you're here, my friend, because what I read this morning at ABC News from over the weekend, it shouldn't surprise me, but when we talk about this coming election being the most consequential, I believe it is, because you're talking about multiple states, secretaries of state now, trying to use the 14th Amendment to keep, presumably, the leading Republican candidate off the ballot, Phil. Multiple states actually colluding to try to keep Trump off the ballot if he's the Republicans' pick. So we're in unprecedented waters here. Mr. Kline, good morning.
Good morning, Chris. And you're correct. And it comes down fundamentally to two visions, competing visions of what America is supposed to be. Either it's an America that believes that government needs all the authority and power to make decisions to create the perfect world, or it's an America where government constrains itself because we are guided by a belief that individuals exercising liberty with responsibility is the best approach to organizing a society. In other words, you've got a Marxist takeover of the left. And I believe some in the left are very, very concerned about this. Well, they need to start raising their voices. But a Marxist takeover, which tries to convince people that if you got a problem, just give more authority to government. You don't like what somebody is saying, you feel unsafe, then we're going to shut them up for you. And when you give that type of power to government, believe me, at some point in time, history teaches us and logic commands, you will be on the short end of the stick and government will come at you. The left, some time ago, lost faith in the democratic process. That's why we see them falling in love with what's called emergency orders. Everything is an emergency. They want a gun violence emergency. So the executive branch, the president, without Congress, without any reference or deference to the other branches of government, will decide guns are a problem. They want an environmental emergency. So the president or their president, the one that they elect, can make these decisions. In 2020, they used COVID emergencies to set aside election laws that protected the integrity and transparency of the election. I could go on and on. They don't believe the American people have the wisdom to exercise liberty with freedom. That's why they have to censor them. That's why they want to criminalize speech and thought. And that's what they're doing right now in Georgia and Michigan with charging these people with crimes that don't allege anybody was engaged in violence, anybody encouraged violence, anybody threatened anybody physically, but crimes stating that these individuals called government officials and said, what you're doing is not good enough, you're wrong, you need to do more because there's a problem. Well, my gosh, we better build a lot of prisons.
Phil Kline.
We're going to approach the law that way.
He's the former Attorney General of Kansas. He has written a piece at defendtheelectors.org. This is called Redefining America. The piece is called Redefining America at defendtheelectors.org. The 4 indictments against Donald Trump, notwithstanding, when you're talking about trying to keep him off the ballot altogether, because polls now suggest since April Trump has gained 11 points, at least in the Wall Street Journal poll, however much you want to put in polls, whatever. But it seems as though he's only gaining strength. And if you enter third-party choices up against Biden and Trump, it only helps Trump. So they're now openly just discussing, well, I guess there's one of two things I'm noticing, Phil. Confirm or deny it for me. One, as we talked about, they're trying to keep him off the ballot altogether. Or two, it seems to me they're trying to attack Supreme Court justices like Thomas and Alito. My theory is that this is the one branch of government that drives them crazy they don't control, and so they're going to try to undermine them by making them sound as though they're corrupt and need to be impeached. And that's our currently constituted Supreme Court. What do you say about it?
I think both are correct. And when you look at our Bill of Rights, that's a part of our Constitution, there's a couple of things about it, Chris. First of all, it's in a vault in Washington, D.C. at the National Archives because the parchment on which it's written is so fragile. It won't stop a bullet. It won't stop anybody trying to punch you. It will not defend your rights. The only way that document has power is if the truth in the words are reflected in the heart of a people and reflected by a high court in its decisions. And they are blocking the left's trampling on individual liberty and rights. The left is now about cultural hegemony. It's about everybody thinking alike. That's what woke culture is. If you don't think like me, you don't have the rights that I have. That document stands in opposition to that. That document, well, it is one of the most anti-democratic documents in human history. It says if 330 million believe that this is right and one believes this is wrong, the one can believe that way. That's anti-democratic. Democracy in its pure form is two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. And guess who gets eaten? Every time. So that document stands in the way of their agenda, their woke agenda. And the Supreme Court is the protector of that document. So absolutely they have to attack the court. And that's why you see the legacy media tripping over themselves, creating stories that are not real stories pertaining to the court. It's frightening. They are undermining that important protection of our civil liberties.
How do you, as a legal scholar, a man of the law who's practiced many, many years, how do you see this? I haven't talked to you since 4 indictments of this guy. And if assuming he becomes the nominee, which all evidence seems to suggest he's about to, how does this end? Or can you even forecast it right now?
It's dangerous. This winner takes all. This, we've taken the guardrails off the road of how power is exercised in this nation. And if it continues, the nation cannot hold. It's dangerous to approach it this way. And I think the left is becoming more desperate.
Yes.
And with more desperation comes more extreme demands, commands, and weaponization of government against its people. It's a frightening time in America.
And may I just ask you, because, again, I think you're a really fair-minded guy. I have heard it said, in fact, I think we've had guests on this show basically say, I think Ned Ryan, who I think you know, said it, that it may have to become this mutually assured destruction for a while in order to right the ship. Meaning, he says, it can't be anymore that they're willing to jail everyone in opposition to them, but if we get a modicum of power, we say, well, we'll let the election sort it out. I don't know where you come down on that. As a person of the law, I know ultimately we believe in the law and the Constitution, but what of that? You know, Hillary Clinton isn't in jail. The Bidens aren't in jail.
I still believe in a deep reservoir of within the American people of a basic understanding that all people truly need to be treated equally under the law, and that those liberties in the Constitution deserve protection. What the left has done is they've mobilized a minority that sounds like a majority. And I'll give you a couple of examples. You know, you remember the summer of George Floyd and all of the riots and everything that was happening. Many of those people who were motivated to go out on the streets were paid. They were organized. Now, many Americans were concerned about it, rightfully so. But those who were driving the news were paid activists. They are well-funded. They are organized. Moreover, the news coverage is pretty much controlled. You know, the economics of media, Chris, has become more difficult over time, especially for the major network news organizations. They don't have the resources they once had to really have reporters sitting there on TV talking about the stories that they have created and investigated. Most of the people on TV now don't call anybody. It's whip and read. The story is given to them.
Yes.
The angle is given to them. There are 3 leftist nonprofits that are funded about $130 million a year who do nothing but every day feed those stories to the media. And they provide the experts, they provide the guests, they do everything. So the media has outsourced their job to these organizations.
Yeah.
And we have a messaging campaign in America that does not reflect the American people. My point is this: the political debate is not where America lives. America lives in community, working with people of different opinions, of all races, of all thoughts, of gender variations, whatever, trying to find solutions. They hate cancel culture. It's the media and the elite that are driving this. So here's my point. I hope if we elect a true conservative or maybe a traditional liberal, they will stand up and say, I am not going to violate these principles. This is what we believe. This is who America is. And I will stand firm. Somebody shoots at me, I will certainly protect myself. But I'm not going to weaponize government and violate the Constitution to go after my enemies. That is a recipe for disaster.
You would say, though, Phil Kline, that the Justice Department, such that it is, needs an enema?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
and there are things that we can do, Chris. You think about the DOJ right now. Everybody's in Washington, D.C. You need to take all these agencies and break them out amongst the states. Creating the District of Columbia as its own source of power is the consolidation of power that promotes Marxism. Marxism wants all power at the top. And a free society wants power at the lowest level possible with some basic guidelines. You know, you're not to discriminate based on race, things like that. So what we've got right now is everybody lives up in Northern Virginia and the D.C. Beltway, and that's why all the wealth is up there right now, because so much power in government. But everybody lives up there. And you've got the DOJ living up there. You've got the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, which can have jurisdiction over every federal government prosecution because that's the seat of the government. You've got those D.C. judges playing golf, having dinner, doing everything with those DOJ members. And you've got this cabal. I mean, Merrick Garland was the former chief judge of the D.C. Circuit.
Yeah.
And so you've got all these people who think alike with a jury pool that is nowhere near what America is like, deciding all of these things for the DOJ. It's comfortable. It's the good old boys club up there. It is similar to what the Deep South was back during the days of Jim Crow laws. If you're a black man walking on the street in the Deep South, watch out. Oh, yeah, we have all the trappings of justice. You have to be charged with a crime. You have to go before a judge. You have a jury of white men. Well, go to D.C. right now.
Yeah.
And what you get is a whole stack. All the cards are stacked against you. We need to diversify jurisdiction of that court. We need to spread out these agencies throughout the United States. We need to break up that centralization of power.
Yeah,
you see it in all areas. You see it in education. Education occurs where a parent, teacher, and child interact, not in those Washington, D.C. offices.
Yes.
But all the power's up there because the money's up there.
So well said, so smart. DefendTheElectors.org is the website. Phil's piece there, Redefining America. 20 years in business. Congratulations to Mike Lindell and MyPillow. 80 million pillows sold over those 20 years. Can you believe that number? Well, Mike and his team at MyPillow, they want to thank each and every one of you for giving them such success over these many years. And now they want to celebrate by giving you the lowest price in MyPillow history. He told me that if you call or log on to MyPillow.com or call them today, you'll get a queen-size MyPillow to celebrate their 20 years in business for just $19.98. 20 years and just about $20 with tax. How about that? $19.98, that's it, for a queen-size MyPillow. Do you know the regular price of this thing is almost $50 more? So you're talking about a $50 discount. By the way, for the king size, you'll get it for just $10 more, $29.98. It's a huge sale. And incidentally, in addition to these pillows that are deeply discounted right now, you go to MyPillow.com and you'll get a discount using my name, Chris Podcast. Use that as your promo code, Chris Podcast. Click on the radio listener square and enter that. And you're talking about mattress toppers, pet beds, mattresses, my slippers, sheets, and of course the pillows, so much more. You can try it on. If you've gone to MyPillow.com and you've thought to yourself, maybe it's a little expensive, now's the time. Celebrate 20 years with Mike Lindell. And know this, 10-year warranty. 10 years they warranty these things. So if they ever wear out or you have trouble, you can exchange for brand new. 60 days they let you take this stuff home, and if you don't like it, you can send it back for a full refund. So you got nothing to lose but a great night's sleep on MyPillow products. I've colleagues I've sent these my slippers to. They love them. Christine loves hers. The sheets are comfortable. The towels are super absorbent. Even old Dean loves his dog bed. And we drink my coffee here at the office every day. I just brewed some this morning. MyPillow.com, promo code ChrisPodcast, all right? With that warranty fully intact, or call 800-932-5056. 800-932-5056, promo code ChrisPodcast, or MyPillow.com, promo code ChrisPodcast, if you please to save. I think she wrote one of the most important books of the COVID era, in my estimation, The Weaponization of Loneliness. It's literally on my nightstand because I think it's that important a subject. The Weaponization of Loneliness, the title of the book, How Tyrants Stoke Our Fear of Isolation to Silence, Divide, and Conquer. Stella Morobito is the author. She's also a senior contributor at The Federalist. We, I think, last talked to her at CPAC, if memory serves. But Stella, it's great to have you back on the show. Good morning.
Well, good morning. It's great to be here, Chris, and thanks for that wonderful, the wonderful assessment of my book.
Yeah, I'm sincere when I say it because I all this time later I ruminate on COVID and still believe that title, the isolation. You saw what it did to people. In some cases, it took people's lives. It made them dependent. It ruined students' academic performances. It caused real division in homes. It caused homes to, pack up and move, businesses to close. I still, to this day, I know people get tired of me saying it, believe the trauma of that era is yet to be fully understood.
Oh, absolutely. And I always have to cite Hannah Arendt at her book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, that notes that social isolation is actually a precondition for tyranny. And that's why tyrannical governments, she wrote, always seek to bring isolation about. And we saw it happen in the most unprecedented way. I mean, it was literally enforced on us in ways that we never experienced in America before.
And now the question becomes, as we hear them talk about COVID, as we see the guy we're pretending to be president wearing a mask again, one can't help but wonder, are they gearing up again? Do you see signs of it? By the way, do you think the public would fall for it again? I pray not, but I don't know. How do you read the general public mood for another round of that, if in fact they tried it?
Well, I have high hope. And hopefully they'll materialize, that people are not going to fall for it the way they did the first time around. The first time around, especially in the early days, I mean, everybody was confused about what was going on with this pandemic and everything, but it didn't take long to learn that, you know, this was a virus that was nearly 100% recoverable if you didn't have other major health problems. So, you know, it was total overkill on all of these mandates, and you know, people. I actually personally know people who were severely injured by the injection. I won't call it a vaccine. By taking the injection, and they swear they will not take any boosters. They will never do this sort of thing again. And they seem pretty sincere, and not just the people who are injured, but people who are waking up. So my hope is that you know, it won't go over. It'll go over like a lead balloon, hopefully. But there are always a huge contingent of people who go along with it. They're, you know, very obedient and compliant and conform. The only pushback to that is to speak out openly, despite all the threats of that's what isolation does. I mean, the threat of isolation is really the motivator for that sort of thing. And of course, that's why I think that they are going to bring this sort of thing back. They want to, you know, ratchet it up again and see what they can do. It may not come in the form of mandates. Who knows? But anyway, we need to, you know, go in with eyes wide open.
Yeah, people need to understand what neurotics behavior can bring them to do. I think we throw that around as sort of a pad or cliche or eye roll thing, but neurotics, when given just a little bit of power or treated seriously enough, they can command a room. They can get a bunch of people to comply, to conform, to stand down, to side. That's why I have repeatedly said, you must, when you see it, when you spot it, point it out, confront it. It is not enough to say, I'm not participating anymore. You got to confront it when you see it, or these people will ride herd right over us again.
Oh, that's right. I mean, I did an interview recently where someone said, what would have happened if during a lot of these, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion sessions in big corporations, if people didn't just sit back quietly, and if one or two people in the room said, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. If that had happened, I don't know that, you know, it did, but it doesn't sound like that ever happened much. That, just as you said, these neurotics, or in my book, in the chapter on the totalitarian impulse, you know, I call it the almost psychopath, who seem very, you know, very inclined to, you know, take over, you know, the control freaks. Yes. We all have come across them. And you're right, absolutely, Chris. We cannot allow them to, you know, just take over our lives.
Well, it's because I think most normal people see someone who panics, straps a mask on their face, and is terrified, and you think, oh, gosh, that poor person, I don't want to make them uncomfortable. I don't want to scare them needlessly.
Right.
I want to be sensitive to their mental condition and all of these things. But when you do that, that difference can paralyze an entire community or your office or your neighborhood. Because one person's fear, even if it's well-founded or legitimate, it cannot have dominion over the rest of us. It can't.
No, absolutely not. It needs to be questioned, especially these days. You know, with all of the new policies that seem to be put into place to shut us up about what we believe, like this claim that, you know, that information can't really be shared openly because of the threat of, quote, disinformation.
Right.
That somehow, like the head of this CISA, the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act, her name was Jen Easterly. She came out with this claim that our cognitive infrastructure is, the American mind, in other words, is really important to preserve from misinformation or disinformation. So they come out with this crazy policy that they're going to control information, under the guise of protecting us. And this is always how it happens. There's always some pretext for tyranny.
Yes, I can say any fool, crazy thing I want and demand uniform obedience and compliance. And if you question it, you're the misinformed one. I'm the authority and you're misinformed. My neuroses has dominion over your questions, is sort of the attitude.
Oh, yeah. And they will always use a form of demonization to try to shut people up. I mean, you've heard all the slurs. White supremacist, bigot, anti-vaxxer, it goes on and on and on. Conspiracy theorists, fascists, they just use these little, these smears to kind of trigger the very natural conformity impulse that all of us have, because we're hardwired to connect with other people. We have a primal fear of ostracism. It's just part of the human condition. We're social animals. And so tyrants have learned how to manipulate and exploit that vulnerability in us. And as you said, we just can't allow this to happen.
Do you think Stella Morobito, who wrote this important book called The Weaponization of Loneliness, How Tyrants Stoke Our Fear of Isolation to Silence, Divide, and Conquer, when guys like Fauci are literally presented prestigious, thorough, studied paperwork, even from people like Chuck Todd, and he's told to his face, listen, every study we have in front of us says masks didn't work, and to this week, he's still going and doing media interviews saying, well, that's just one study. There are other studies that don't say that. Is that guy, do you think he knows and is driven by something? It's dangerous to speculate, but I'm trying to get into the heads of these people. Do they want us back in masks because that gives them a feeling of, what, power, superiority? They genuinely believe it? Can you read it?
Well, I think many among the elites don't really believe their own propaganda. I mean, I think maybe some of them do, and they really think that they're out to do good and all of that. But I think the totalitarian impulse can be so hardwired in some of these folks that they know damn well that it's not for our protection. It's for their own investment in their status and power and everything else. And there is a point at which we absolutely have to speculate. I mean, what is the detective? What is the first thing a detective in any crime story has to do? He has to try to figure out a motive, to try to figure out how do you get out of this trap. So there is a point at which we do have to speculate, because we can't get out of the trap otherwise. So I think it's important to speculate on that, and I do that in my book. But I also try to draw out a process. In my book, it's not really trying to look at a specific villain, although I do believe that Fauci symbolizes the weaponization of loneliness, which is why his photo is on the cover of my book. But I think that it's something that we have to try to understand this process of the weaponization of loneliness in order to extricate ourselves from it. And I truly believe that is the prime ingredient. Social isolation is the prime ingredient and precondition for tyranny, and that's why free speech is under such attack. They don't want us talking to one another.
Yes.
They don't want us establishing bonds of friendship and loyalty and trust with one another. They want to be, they want us all dependent upon them.
Yes, and the mask is the ultimate symbol on many fronts, isn't it? The mask covers the face. The mask keeps us from seeing one another's expressions. The mask literally silences us. It's a symbol of our compliance. That mask had such a deleterious effect, and then these monsters on top of that. The idea that during the holidays, there was discussion about you really shouldn't cross state lines or go to your grandparents' home, or I still marvel with time and distance from it that we ever allowed it, even entertained it at the level that we did, and I say collective we.
Oh, yes. No, I mean, if you consider the extent to which they cultivated hostilities, where no hostilities had existed before.
Yes.
I mean, this is a standard procedure for tyrants to, the technical term is relational aggression, where they tell you to pile on against any family members who don't get the injection, or to stay away from them, or to hound them. I mean, this estranged families. It ruined friendships. I mean, that's the whole idea. Divide people to conquer them. Separate people, build social distrust so that your only recourse is, the captor, the federal government or whatever, the mass state. And that's where it's leading.
Stella Morobito, I am just, this book, I can't recommend it highly enough to everyone. I hope everyone reads it and understands it. If, God forbid, this comes again, I hope we're never this naive or vulnerable again, at least in our lifetimes. I suppose every 100 years something like this can happen because people die and populations forget, and new populations will be susceptible. I hope as long as you and I are alive, we never see it again. But your book will go a long way to educating people. The Weaponization of Loneliness, How Tyrants Stoke Our Fear of Isolation to Silence, Divide, and Conquer. Stella Morobito, thank you for your time today.
The Chris Stigall Show podcast.